Good morning, and again, we welcome you to New Pilgrim Baptist Church, where we're located here in the city of Saraland at 204 Shell Street. And again, we're delighted to have you join us this morning for the study of the Sunday school lesson. It's always a pleasure to share with you in these studies of these lessons. And we find that it's in Sunday school where we gain our foundation. There are questions that we might have about the word that we can't ask during or in the middle of a message, but Sunday school gives us that opportunity to study the word and to get our questions answered. And this morning, again, we're studying from the unit topic, Prophets of Restoration. And our lesson for today, for April 18th, from the Standard Commentary is the Restoring Builder. From our quarterly, it's Initiating Renewal. And from the Townsend Commentary, it's Nehemiah, the Captive Cupbearer, Rebuilds a Nation. And our lesson print is taken from Nehemiah, the second chapter, verses 11 through 20. Our lesson background is taken from Nehemiah, second chapter through 13th chapter, verses 1 through 22. And as we know, we're studying these prophets, and in this study, we're looking at prophets who are building or who are restoring. And in this study, we studied about some prophets and how they were instrumental in fulfilling the mission that God gave them. On last Sunday, we looked and we saw how God utilized Ezra, and we know that in that setting that Ezra had a sincere heart for the people of God. He prayed and he wept, and God sent him an answer to what the situation that was going on with the children of Israel as they were coming out of exile. We know that Israel was one of the prophets that led them, some of them that returned back to Jerusalem. And Nehemiah, who we'll be studying today, is a contemporary of Ezra. Ezra and Nehemiah were ministering along pretty much during the same time, so much so to in some of the writings, the book of Ezra was considered one book, which included the book of Nehemiah. And Nehemiah is instrumental in continuing the work that Ezra began. Ezra began working on the spiritual reform of the people. He recognized that the children of Israel had been in exile because of being disobedient and because of how they took wives in the pagan land and took on those ways of those people when God had instructed them through Moses not to do that. So Ezra, he built them up spiritually. And today, as we look at Nehemiah, Nehemiah is going to be concerned with the physical rebuilding of Jerusalem. We know that the city was in a very desolate state. And as we look at our lesson background in this first chapter of Nehemiah, Nehemiah receives a report about how things were in Jerusalem. He received this report of his brother Hananiah. Nehemiah asked Hananiah, said, well, how are things looking back in the homeland? And I have to note that Nehemiah was born in captivity. He had never been to Jerusalem, but Jerusalem was the homeland of his parents, his foreparents. He had grandparents and other relatives whose graves were there, and he was concerned about the state of Jerusalem. So as we see in that first chapter, him inquiring, and when he asked his brother Hananiah about the state, Hananiah said, things don't look very good back at home. He said there are some deplorable situations that he said, and I really don't understand how our people are being able to even live in the conditions that they're living in there. He said the city is still desolate. He said the gates that were burned by the Babylonians are still burned down. He says a lot of stuff is in disrepair. He said even the walls that fortified and protected the city have been torn down. And when I was reading this, I thought about the report that Hananiah was giving Nehemiah. How many times do we even ask about what's going on or how conditions are back home? You know, some folk leave home and they don't never think about it anymore. And it's sad too, as I look at some cemeteries, some graveyards that just go uncared for. Folk just don't care about where they laid their ancestor to rest. But Nehemiah was concerned about this because he said, we got some folk buried back there. So Nehemiah became so concerned about this report that he got from his brother Hananiah that it disturbed him. And immediately it said he began to pray and he began to weep. Now, this man is crying over a city that he's never been to. But he said, I have some ties back there. He said, I have a part of my heart that's back there in the city of Jerusalem. No doubt he had heard the history of the city. He knew how at one time it had been a very prosperous area. And not only that, but it was the center of worship because God had allowed Solomon to build this extravagant temple in Jerusalem. But all of its glory days were now in gloom and doom. And this bothered Nehemiah. Now, a little bit about Nehemiah. Nehemiah had found favor in Persia, where they were now located. The Persians overtook Babylonian and they became in control. And so now King Cyrus had started to do some rebuilding back in Jerusalem, but that was not finished. And so now here Nehemiah is the cupbearer to one King Xerxes. And Xerxes was one of those kings that was interested in building and reform, but he ruled very sternly. But yet Nehemiah found favor with this king. And it says that he was the king's cupbearer. And being the cupbearer, he had a very important position. He put his life on the line every day because he was the one that had to taste beverages and even sometimes food before they gave it to the king. So if anybody was going to kill the king, and Minister Spencer said he came to murder somebody this morning, if anybody was going to kill the king before they killed the king, surely Nehemiah would have met his demise. But in that role, he directly got to interact with King Xerxes all on a daily basis. And so much so until this king knew his disposition. This king could look at him and tell when things wasn't right with him. And so about 4 months after him getting this report from his brother and him praying over this situation and talking to God and trying to come up with something that he could do, he said, I'm only one person. You know, so many times we look at situations and we discredit what we can do. So there's not a whole lot that I can do about that situation. But Nehemiah was not that type person. Nehemiah had looked at this and he pondered over this and he had kept up his appearances. But finally, one day he's at work and he's around the king, and the king noticed something about him. The king asked him, he said, Nehemiah, what's wrong with you? Why are you so sad today? And Nehemiah, realizing that you can't be around the king and have a sad or gloomy attitude because the king feeds on other people's energy. So if I come in here all sad, gloom, and doom, then this might rub off on the king. So King Xerxes said, Nehemiah, what's wrong with you? Nehemiah looked at him and Nehemiah said, well, you know, King, he began to tell him a little bit about what was going on with him. But he was a little afraid to tell him because he said, now, I don't know if I should tell this man what's really going on with him. But the king looked at him and said, now, you ain't sick. You've been here all week. And I've been looking at you and I've been watching you. But today, you came in here and you are extra sad this morning. He said, so I want to just know what's going on with you, why you're sad. So Nehemiah began to tell the king, he says, King, he says, I'm sad and I'm concerned because of the condition of my home country. He said, I got a report from my brother and things just don't look so good back down in Jerusalem. So how can I put on a happy face over here when things are deplorable at home? When the walls are still burned down and torn down and the gates are still burned down over in Jerusalem, how can I put on a happy face? So Nehemiah found himself in a situation where he was sad, gloom, and doom because of the conditions back home. So that brings us up to our lesson today. So as we look at this background of this lesson, we also find something unique about Nehemiah. Nehemiah has this unique prayer life. he finds himself praying, and that was part of the key to his success. But we also know that that was the same case with Ezra. Ezra found himself in a prayerful state quite often. So the relationship that Nehemiah has with his king Xerxes is unique, and we know that King Xerxes is the stepson of Queen Esther. So there was some connections there between Esther and this king, and we know that story of Queen Esther, how God showed Esther favor. So again, even as we're looking at Nehemiah, we're looking at Nehemiah as a builder, but he was only successful because of the favor that God had put upon them. Our lesson introduction I want to share this morning from the Townsend commentary, and it's a really unique introduction, and it's entitled "The First Essential Quality of Leadership." So as we look at this introduction, it says extraordinary leaders capable of delivering results under difficult and challenging circumstances are hard to find. Throughout time, every organization has had a great demand for good leadership. The January 8, 1996 edition of Business Week magazine featured a lead story entitled "The Top 25 Managers of the Year," a list of men and women who ran some of the largest, most profitable corporations in the world. The article revealed that these top managers had at least 4 common characteristics that contributed to their success. First, they were all innovative. They used technology to expand and enhance their businesses to produce double-digit growth. Second, they recognized the need to develop strategic partnerships with the companies around the world, also known as networking. They were willing to work with other organizations to achieve their long-term goals. Third, they worked with a global perspective and saw their target markets extending beyond their own spheres of operation. These leaders all cultivated global vision for their businesses. Fourth, they embraced change and innovation. That is, they successfully led their companies to adapt to ongoing changes in the marketplace. They were willing to restructure and re-engineer their businesses to maintain their competitive edge and stay a step ahead of their competitors. These men and women were highly successful leaders who achieved great success for themselves and the organizations they manage. This is a great benefit in imitating the good habits of effective leaders. Leadership is a learned behavior. Leaders are not born, they are made through discipline and diligent work. God is always looking for good leaders. God's number one criteria for leadership is faithfulness and faith in God. See Joshua 1, 5 through 10. In today's world, there is a clear need for effective leadership both in and outside of the church. Nehemiah's story is especially compelling because he was such an unlikely candidate for the work he completed so effectively. Nehemiah had never ever been to Jerusalem, yet God used him to mobilize and to unite a discouraged and a broken people and to complete a great work. His accomplishment was an extraordinary one, worthy of study. So that's why we're studying this lesson this morning, because we're looking at the leadership skills that Nehemiah possessed. Our lesson print passage this morning is taken from Nehemiah, the 2nd chapter, verses 11 through 20. And before I read the printed passage, I'll share my visual for this morning. Our visual this morning is simply the task that was before Nehemiah. Nehemiah had a surmountable task. So he was going back to Jerusalem to rebuild the wall, and he took with him the favor of God. So this morning our visual is the wall, a hammer, and a leveler, and of course the plans. Nehemiah could not have been successful in completing this task had he not had a plan. So our lesson print from Nehemiah 2, 11 through 20. So I came to Jerusalem and was there 3 days, and I arose in the night, I and some few men with me. Neither told I any man what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem. Neither was there any beast with me, save the beast that I rode upon. And I went out by night by the gate of the valley, even before the dragon well, and to the dung port, and viewed the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and the gates thereof were consumed with fire. Then I went unto the gate of the fountain, and to the king's pool, but there was no place for the beast that was under me to pass. Then I went up in the night by the brook, and viewed the wall, and turned back, and entered by the gate of the valley, and so returned. And the rulers knew not whither I went, or what I did. Neither had I yet told it to the Jews, nor to the priests, nor to the nobles, nor to the rulers, nor to the rest that did the work. Then said I unto them, ye see the distress that we're in, how Jerusalem lays waste, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. And let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, that we may be no more a reproach. Then I told them of the hand of God, which was good upon me, as also the king's word that he had spoken unto me. And they said, let us rise up and build. And they strengthened their hands for this good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite, and Tobiah the servant of Ammonite, and Geshem the Arabian heard it, they laughed us to scorn, and despised us, and said, what is this thing that ye do? Will ye rebel against the king? Then answered I them, and said unto them, the God of heaven, he will prosper us. Therefore we his servants will arise and build. Ye that have no portion, nor right, nor memorial in Jerusalem. So here we find that in this printed passage, we find Nehemiah has entered into Jerusalem. He had to get permission to go first. So in preparing to go, in the verses that are omitted for our lesson, verses 1 through 10, Nehemiah makes his request of the king. As the king asked him what was causing him to be sad, the king was moved, and his next words to Nehemiah was, what is your request of me? Because the king had already seen Nehemiah's desire, and now the king buys in by saying, Nehemiah, what can I do to help you accomplish what you need to accomplish? Now, Nehemiah had already prayed about this thing, and because he had prayed about this thing, God had already begun to give him a vision and a plan. So Nehemiah says, King, this is what I need you to do. I just need you to grant me a leave of absence. I need you to let me go down to Jerusalem and take a look at what's going on down there and rebuild some things down there. He said, but I need you, in granting me this leave of absence, I need you to write me some letters, because I might have some trouble trying to get through some of the areas that I got to go. But if I got permission from the king, it'll be all right. He said, so if you don't mind, I need you to just pen me a few letters and put your royal seal on them, so that if I get stopped by some of these governors down there, I got some papers to document what my purpose is in going is for. He said, then you got another governor over there that's over your timber. He said, I need you to write this guy a letter. He said, you got some fine timber over there, and I'm going to need some of that timber. And no, he didn't say I need some money to buy some timber. He said, I'm going to need you to give me some timber so that I can rebuild this wall. So the king says, Nehemiah, I just have another question for you. He said, how long is it going to take you to do all this? Nehemiah said, well, King, I don't know exactly what the timetable is. All I know is that I need to go down there and I need to complete the work. He said, so if you'll just grant me this to go down there, he said, I'm going to try and do it in a spell of about 12 years. He said, it may take me a little bit longer than that. He said, I don't know yet until I go down there and examine the damage. So he said, I might be gone a few years. The king said, and it was noted, and this was unique, that while Nehemiah was asking all this stuff, he asked that the queen was present. The queen was sitting there next to the king. No doubt Nehemiah being close to the two, I'm quite sure King may have looked over at her, and she looked at him and said, well, just give him what he needs. Said, Nehemiah has been good to us, so let's go ahead and show him some favor. And so the king grants every request that Nehemiah asked of him. and even went above and beyond what Nehemiah asked, because the king said, now you still might have a little trouble, so I got a big enough army down here. I'm going to send some of my soldiers and some of my sergeants with you so that you'll guarantee safe passage, so that you'll get there safely. All the while, note that Nehemiah had already documented it's not the king. So Nehemiah said, I hear these words coming out the king's mouth, but it's God's favor that's causing these words to fall off the king's lips. So Nehemiah said, it's not the king, but it's my king that's putting this plan in action. So Nehemiah makes this trip, and it's over 1,100 miles from Persia back to Jerusalem to where he has to make this trip. Said it's going to take about 4 months for him to get there, traveling the way he would travel. And when he gets there, that's where our lesson pick up this morning. Nehemiah said, I need a little rest from this journey. So he said he was there about 3 days. And while he was there the 3 days, he wasn't resting the whole 3 days. He said, now my brother gave me a report, but I need to see this thing for myself. He said, I can't even take my own brother's word for it. And he said, I need to go out here and examine some things. He said, but I already know that I'm not going to be doing this without finding and facing some opposition. He said, everybody around here is not happy that I'm here. And the lesson mentioned 3 individuals that were already upset when they heard Nehemiah. What this Negro doing coming around here trying to build up a wall to help these folks? They don't need no help. We got everything under control here, as long as we keep them where we got them. And you know, some folks like to keep their knee on your neck. But these individuals said, we can just keep them where we got them. We'll keep things just like they are. And guess what? Some of the Jews that had returned had become satisfied in where they were and how conditions were there. But Nehemiah got there and he examined. It says after 3 days, he rose up in the night. And notice now, Nehemiah could have got straight to work when he got there. Not only did he have to figure out and take a look at what was going on, but he had to find out where the people's hearts were. He had to find out where the people's mind were. He had to find out what was going on with the people. And one of the things that he noticed about his oppositions and his enemies, he said, now, the more information I give these folks, they're going to be able to use it against me. So Nehemiah said, I'm going to go out at night. Hopefully they'll be asleep. But, you know, some folks be peeping out the one that night. But Nehemiah said, I'm going to go out here at night and survey things and see how everything looks. He said, I can't tell everybody and I can't take everybody with me. You know, that's what some of us mess up. But before God bless us, when he even dropped the notion of a blessing in our spirit, we got to tell the world. You got to be like you just won this $52 million lottery. Don't tell a soul, because when you tell them, everybody going to be there waiting on them. So Nehemiah said, I can't tell everybody. I can't let everybody know what I'm doing. So he began to work on this. He went out and he surveyed the property. He surveyed the land. He looked at everything and noted that he couldn't make a full circle during his observation. He went almost completely around the city, and he came to a point to where he couldn't get the animal that he was riding on through there. So he had to come down off of the animal and observe that portion on foot. And note, Nehemiah didn't take but one animal with him. He said, the rest of y'all got to walk. He said, we take all these horses and buggies and stuff out here. Y'all going to wake them folks up over there that I don't want to know what we doing. He said, so we going to go out here and survey and examine this. We got to look at this thing and see what it is that God would have us do. And note, Nehemiah wasn't looking at the job to see how hard it was, because he knew that there's nothing too hard for God. Nehemiah wasn't looking at the work to see how much work he had to do, because he already knew that all I got to do is trust God and he's going to see us through. So it says that he surveyed it, he looked at it, he went down by the valley before the Dragon Wall, and he even went down by the Dung Port, and the Dung Port is the sewer system. There was an area down from the Kendrian Valley where they used to sacrifice animals for atonement, and in that area they would drain off the sewage from the city of Jerusalem down through this Dung Port. So he said he even got to inspect the sewer system and see what rebuilding we might need to do down there. He went down, and it says he come on back around and he began to observe some things. But one thing that caught Nehemiah's attention was the condition that the gates was in. And the gates always represent the entrance or the presence of God. So Nehemiah said, we can't have this city deployed and these gates tore down like that, because we want our God to come in, and we don't want him to have to come through these gates. So he went on and he did his evaluation, he did his examination, and he looked around. And then he says that he looked, and as he was looking through all this, he began to document and note. It said he was observing some things. And he said he set out during the night, and he said he after examining this, he got back and he began to write this stuff. He said, and I didn't tell nobody. I didn't tell these folk that I came here. You know, there was some folk that were in charge there who at least thought they were in charge, that expected Nehemiah to come in and give them a full report of why he was there. What you doing down here? You ain't got no business down here. You ain't got nothing down here but dead kinfolk. And so Nehemiah said, I didn't even tell them. He said, I didn't tell the Jews. He said, I didn't tell nobody. And then he said he moved on, he moved through. But let's note this about Nehemiah. Nehemiah knew the task that was before him. He knew who had given him the task. He says that the Lord had put this in his heart. Note, the Lord didn't put it in his mind, he put it in his heart. And so therefore, Nehemiah had a passion for this mission that he was on. He wasn't going to let no one or anyone deter him from accomplishing what God had instructed him to do. And that was to build a wall. Now, some folk would have looked at the ruins, ruins, and they would run. But instead of running from the work, Nehemiah runs to the work. He didn't look at how big it was. He looked at how big his God was. So we see Nehemiah in this. He's beginning to exhibit some very unique leadership characteristics. Now, leaders, we need to take some notes from Nehemiah. I already told you, don't tell it all. Wait till you get your stuff done. Let folks see it going up before you start telling them what you're going to do. Let them be like I was riding down Highway 43 for a couple of weeks. I'm looking over there, right there next to Wells Fargo Bank, and I'm at the barbershop asking Pop, what they building over there? I said, I don't know, Tiny. I heard they was building a Dollar General, but I don't know for sure. I didn't know what it was until I saw them put a Dollar General sign out there. So you can't tell folk or let folk know everything that you're doing. Let them wait till you put your sign up. So we see now Nehemiah completes his survey. He says he went through and he examined everything. He looked at it and everything looked well. And now he summons the leaders. So our second outline, verses 17 and 18, he summons these leaders. And as he summons these leaders, he has a message for these leaders. He said, then I said unto them, he said, y'all don't see what I see. He said, I came here to Jerusalem and y'all been living in this. He said, I just came down here for this job. He said, but y'all don't see what I see. He said, now it looks pretty bad around here to me. He said, this looks deplorable to me. He said, and you all are content living here in this. He said, open your eyes. He said, do you need to borrow this magnifying glass? Open your eyes and look around. He said, Jerusalem lying waste. He said, this is something that we should take pride in. This is our home. And that's one thing that my parents taught me. Them boys on 202 Harris Avenue, they belong to us. And we take pride in it. It may not be a mansion, but Henry Mills and Lily Mills worked hard for what we have, and I take pride in it. Now, if you want to offend me, you mess with them boys over there. And so Nehemiah had this desire. He had a pride in this because it was home. And he told these folks, he said, look around. He said, look at the gate. He says, over 140 years, these gates was burned down. He said, and this thing still look now like it did then. He said, something wrong with this picture. He said, look at the wall. He said, this wall still tore down. And guess what? Now, King Cyrus had granted them to begin to rebuild the city. But they started working on the city and working on the temple, and they looked around and said, what about our house? We need to go over here and start working on our house. How we going to, live here? We ain't going to live in the temple. We got to build us some houses. So their focus got off. They got off track. But Nehemiah, after sharing this with him, he said, I need you to see what I see. And that's the first step to getting help in any step program. Is you got to realize you got a problem. They didn't realize the problem that they had because they were so caught up in themselves and what they were doing. But then Nehemiah, after summoning the leaders and having them to see, and what a desperate time we're in now. We really need some folk now to just wake up and open their eyes and just look around and just see how deplorable the situations are that we're living in. We really need some folk to open their eyes and just realize how desolate our city is in. And when we look at these situations, when we look at all the shootings and all the killings, somebody's eyes ought to come open. Nehemiah says, then I told them of the hand of my God, which was good upon me. He said, now I told them what needed to be done, but I don't want them to get it twisted and say, this to come down here and trying to run things. He gonna come down here and tell us how to build us wall. Nehemiah said, I needed to let them know that I'm only here because God sent me. You know, so many times folks get twisted. You know, they look at the pastor, they look at the leader, and they say, well, you know, he think he was he's only here or she's only here because of God's good hand. Because God gave them the vision. He gave them the work to bring to the people. So Nehemiah said, I'm only here because of the good hand of God. And he said, and also because of the king's word. He said, now God is doing this thing. He said, but I can't give the king credit. He said, because I know who was moving. He said, the king was just a puppet in God's hands. And everything that came out of King Xerxes' mouth, when he granted me what he granted me, God placed it there. So he was letting them know. And then the people said, after hearing Nehemiah speak, this is what they said. They said, let us get up and build. They say, it's time for us to go to work. We done been down here long enough to be done this. We need to go to work. We need to do this. So they strengthened their hands for the good work. And notice it didn't just say they strengthened their hands for the work, but they strengthened their hands for the good work. They rolled up their sleeves and they said, let's go to work. Now, if you want to send some folk home, tell them some stuff needs to be done. You start writing down a honey-do list and telling them, honey, we need to do this, honey, we need to do that. Some of them going to pack up and leave. But these individuals, once Nehemiah shared with them, they caught the vision or they saw the disrepair. They saw what he was saying. And now I told you already that everybody ain't going to be on your side. Everybody ain't happy for you. Verse 19 says, but when. And now anytime you see but, there's a conjunction, you can look for what's coming behind it. Now all these folks just got excited and told Nehemiah, we're going to help you build this wall. In other words, they were like at a football game, and you know how sometimes the crowd get excited and everybody starts saying, we going to do the way. We going to do the way. They was already cheering and said, we going to build a wall. We going to build a wall. But when Sanballat, the Horonite, and Tobiah, his servant, and Ammonite, and Geshem, the Arabian, heard it, they said, these folks done lost their mind over there. Now, this man done come down here and had a pep rally and got them over there shouting and cheering and doing the wave and talking about building a wall. And then Nehemiah said they laughed us to scorn. They laughed so hard they was, falling all on the ground, rolling on the ground. Now, what they gonna do? This wall been over here looking like this long, and what y'all gonna do? Y'all gonna do what? And so he said they despised it. And he said, they asked the question, what is this thing that y'all gonna do? He said, you're gonna rebel against the king. He said, the king ain't sending no orders over here to rebuild this wall. So Nehemiah, you just come over here and took over and telling these folks we're gonna build a wall. Nehemiah didn't open his pouch check. He still had his papers tucked away. He said, I ain't gonna show them nothing until I have to. Sometimes some folks challenge you just to see what kind of information they can get out of you. So instead of asking Nehemiah, did he have authority to do this? They tell him, you done come over here, you're going to take over the king's place. Nehemiah, knowing he had his credentials, he went on about his business. Then answered I them and said, the God of heaven, he will prosper us. Therefore, we, his servants, will arise and build. Nehemiah completed this project in 52 days. A project that could have taken years, he completed it in 52 days. Now, how did Nehemiah accomplish such a task in such a short time? When I shared this visual, which I told you, he came with a plan. God had given Nehemiah the plan for doing this, and Nehemiah went to work on this plan. He broke this thing down into groups and gave each group a part of this wall to build. And guess what? Opposition came while they was building. They had some folk that was trying to fight him. He said, I tell you what, we're going to bring on a second crew. One crew going to hold the sword while the other crew work. He said, and then when we get down on that end and you don't have enough folk down there, you hold your hammer in one hand and your sword in the other hand and keep working on the wall. They were able to build the wall because the people had a mind to work. And we're not going to change the situations and the things that we're in until the people get a mind to work. The people are going to have to want to see a change in order for change to come. And we all know that famous, you know, he said, I've been running for a long time and running down by the river. He said, but I know a change is going to come. So Nehemiah said, no matter what it looked like when I got here, he said, I'm not concerned about what it looked like. And don't let folk upset you when they laugh at what you're doing. When they say you crazy, it's some folks around here laughing at us. And they left a brick building to go worship in a tent. But when God instructs you to do it, you don't question God. You just move according to what God tells you to do. Because guess what? He is the master architect, and he already got the plan in his hand. So all we got to do, don't nobody see the building yet but us, because God gave us the vision. He didn't give them the vision. Don't nobody know the completion date yet but God. So we going to just trust God in what he's given us and what he's told us to do. We just crazy enough to believe that we have enough favor with him for him to open up somebody's forest and send us in there with a letter to say, I sent him over there to get some timber because I got a building that needs to be built. So when God instructs you, and when he gives you the instructions, you just follow the instructions. Nehemiah said, I know I need some things. He didn't go in there and tell the king, I need X amount of dollars. He said, King, I need a letter from you. I need some approval from you. So all we need in every task that we face is the favor of God. With Jesus on our side, things are going to work out fine. All we need to do is to be able to follow through. Not only was Nehemiah able to rebuild the wall, but he was able to build him a house. Nehemiah ended up staying down in Jerusalem for 12 years. And after that, not only did he just build the wall, but the wall was the main focus initially because the city needed to be fortified. The wall represented protection for the city. So, so many times, you see, and this is the other thing I noticed driving back and forth up Celeste Road. I saw these folks building a house up there. And before they built the house, they put the fence around. I say to myself, now that's a little backwards to me. Now, it look like they'd have waited till they got their mansion built before they put this fence up, but they put a real elaborate, nice fence up, and they put it up for a reason. It's fortified. And now they got the mansion, but they had that thing in perspective. And guess what? Who am I to question it anyway? God didn't give me the plan. He gave it to them. I wasn't the architect that drew it up. They had an architect that drew it up. Go by your plan. And that's how we get off track sometimes too. God give us the plan and we going to rethink the plan. No, it look a little hard here. I don't think I'm going to be able to do it this way. But when God gives you the plan, follow the plan and trust God. That concludes our lesson for this morning. Our lesson conclusion, I'm going to read from the standard commentary. The conclusion says, good hands. Often when asking for help, we say, give me a hand with this. And often told tale illustrates the wisdom of asking for help when a task is too big for us. As the story goes, a father watched through the kitchen window as his small son tried to move a large rock in the yard. The boy couldn't get quite enough leverage to tip the rock over. At one point, the father came outside and asked the boy, can you lift the rock? No, Dad, I just can't do it. Are you using all the strength you have? The boy replied, yes, but I just can't move it. The father replied, no, you are not using all the strength that you have because you haven't asked me to help. Nehemiah was going to have not just one rock, but a whole pile of rocks and rubble to move in order to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem. But heavenly and earthly hands would give him more than enough help. Nehemiah could have sung as the persecutor to the old hymn. He got the whole wall in his hand. Like the little boy, our efforts matter, but they will not succeed all on their own. If we ask our Father for help, He has us and every task He gives us in His hand as well. Fervent prayer on the part of Nehemiah played a vital part in Nehemiah completing the work. And our closing prayer says, God, grant us your powerful hand. Without it, we are weak. With it, we are strengthened to overcome any obstacle. Let us rise up and build your church, confident in your promise to be with us. May our hands be strengthened for the work to which you have called us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. And we do invite you to stay with us and join us for our early morning service, our mid-morning service, where our own Pastor Dr. Charlie Williams will be bringing our mid-morning message at 11 a.m.
Right there.
Yeah, that was our lesson.
Hang in there.
He's off now.
I think he off. Is it off, Taylor?